He was suffocating from his own stench. In the middle of autumn, when the leaves had already rotted away in the wet courtyards of the Hofburg, and it had been raining for 4 days straight, someone noticed something strange in the emperor's bedroom. The sheets were moving. The chamberlain, thinking it was a mouse, approached with a candlestick and saw a worm. It was thick, gray, and slimy, crawling from the sick man's groin to the edge of the bed. After that, there was silence for 3 days. On the 4th day, a priest was called. 6 hours later, he fled without saying goodbye. According to the recollections of Rudolf Leut, the emperor's valet, the first symptoms appeared at the beginning of the month. At that time, the emperor complained of a burning sensation in his lower abdomen and night fever. Bloodletting was prescribed twice a week, 1.5 saucers of blood each time. The doctors were not replaced. Count Lanz von Milstein, an old half-blind physician, insisted on ointments made from wine essence, clay, and dried wormwood. Nothing helped. Blood in the urine became constant, and the abdomen swelled. A sour, meaty smell emanated from the emperor's underwear. He was moved to another room, but to no avail. He continued to stink. He screamed at night. Rumors circulated among his inner circle. The evil eye, poisoning, divine punishment. His wife disappeared. Officially, she had gone to a convent, but according to the servants, she was locked in one of the towers, where there was no heating. The entourage began to change. No more than 3 people were allowed near the bed. Food was tasted in front of the captain of the guard. The emperor stopped eating meat, then bread. He drank only warm water, mixed with wine. On the 11th day, the illness became irreversible. Pus burst out of his right groin, eating away at the skin. The tissue around the opening turned black. The skin shriveled like parchment and cracked with every movement. The emperor lay motionless. There was a smell of rotten lard. A damp cloth with a decoction of hyssop and church salt lay on his chest. Only 3 people entered the room: the doctor, a monk, and the captain. The smell was unbearable. From Major von Kleist's report, the sheet was covered with brown marks. On the pillow were translucent insects. We saw them crawling along his neck toward his ear. He did not move. He just stared as if something was moving on the ceiling. On the 14th day, something dark fell out. First, through the bandage, one of the servants fainted. According to the monk Theobald, it was a piece of intestinal tissue, possibly part of the intestinal wall, already destroyed by decay. That evening, the emperor asked for death. He said he could hear voices under the floor, and that those he had executed were coming to him, including monks and boys. He refused to confess, shouting that he would not allow anyone in a cassock to stand over him. The bed was cleaned at night. 3 men in leather aprons lifted the sheets by candlelight, then poured salt water over the remains of the fabric. A servant burned the linen in the inner fireplace. After that, prayers were read all night long. The room was poorly ventilated. Mold appeared on the walls. The floor began to creak and become damp. On the 17th day, a new doctor arrived. Young, clean-shaven, dressed in a black robe, he made a diagnosis: internal decomposition of unknown origin. He advised making an incision in the lower abdomen to drain the pus. 2 hours later, a rough operation was performed. An incision was made just below the navel, from which more than 3 cups of thick black liquid mixed with mucus flowed out. The emperor screamed so loudly that the glass in the windows rattled. Then he fell silent for a day. After that, he began to speak again. He whispered that the walls were breathing, that there was an animal sitting at his feet, that his lips were rotting. On the same day, the senior confessor entered the chambers on special orders. The emperor was given a solution of opium, but he refused it. He said he wanted to remember every moment of his torment. He whispered that this was retribution, that he had broken his vow, that he had killed the wrong person. He whispered a name into his ear. The name was written down and sealed. It was hidden in the archives. In the days that followed, Worms appeared not only in his bed, but also on the floor. They were found in cracks, under chests, and on the walls. They were burned. The emperor did not sleep. His eyes turned white, one completely, the other partially. His breathing became difficult. He did not eat. He only drank wine mixed with water, sometimes the blood of a lamb, consecrated in a special ritual performed at night. No one knew who performed it. The priest disappeared in the morning. On the 23rd day, the first dead man was carried out of the chambers, a servant. He had suffocated from the stench. He had fainted 3 times. The last time, he did not regain consciousness. His body was wrapped in cloth and buried without ceremony. No one wanted to go near it. The next day, the second man died from an infection caused by a cut he had received while changing his bandages. The emperor ordered that his hand be cut off. The body turned black anyway. The emperor laughed. He said that death was now at the door and that it could not be turned away. Access to the bed was completely restricted. 24 guards stood watch around the perimeter. Every evening, the symptoms were recorded: the color of the pus, the frequency of moans, body temperature. The records were kept by 2 monks, taking turns. One went mad and gouged out his eyes. The second disappeared. Their papers remained. They described, "Today he spoke in a strange voice. I was before him and will be after you." The smell grew stronger, causing headaches. It smelled like a swamp, rot, and something that should not be in a human being. An insect the size of a fingernail, resembling a tick, crawled out of his ear. It crawled under the bed. The guards were replaced at night. The old guard was replaced by guards from other lands, who were promised promotions and land grants. Those who remained at the doors of the imperial chambers for more than 2 nights in a row began to lose sleep. One soldier, according to reports, tried to stab himself in the chest with a knife, explaining later that he wanted to let out the air that His Majesty was breathing. The skin on the monarch's stomach turned black. With every touch, it peeled off like wet paper. An ointment made from vinegar, garlic, and prosphora ash brought brief relief, but then convulsions began. The smell could not be concealed, even by a thick blanket soaked in fir infusion. It smelled of wet earth, mold, and rotten eggs. One of the monks wrote, "I prayed without words, for my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. God did not enter this room." Political life outside the chambers continued unabated. On the 7th day after the abscess was opened, 3 contenders for the position of regent arrived at the chancellor's office: the emperor's brother, the archbishop of the eastern provinces, and the widowed duchess of Regensburg. They did not see the ruler, but each brought papers supposedly certified by his signature. All 3 documents were forged. They bore a seal, but the ink was fresh. A struggle began for control of the keys to the throne room. The emperor had not spoken for 2 days. He was no longer being fed. The liquid poured into his mouth through a spoon flowed back out. His lips were cracked, his gums blackened, his eyes became cloudy, his pupils moved incoherently. One of the doctors, without waiting for approval, suggested administering a decoction of poppy capsules to ease the pain. The infusion was carried out secretly, while the captain of the guard was asleep. This caused a seizure. The body arched, and a clot of bloody foam burst from his mouth. After that, the emperor began to speak, but only in single words. Most often, darkness, smell, cold, and a name that no one knew. From the report of the court secretary, he uttered this name 3 times, once, loudly. The servants froze. Then it flowed from his ears. The blood was black. On the 29th day, the bleeding became continuous. It was recorded twice a day. A thick, foul-smelling liquid flowed from his anus, urethra, and cracks in his stomach. Ulcers appeared inside the folds of his skin, from which maggots emerged. They were collected with spoons and thrown into the hearth. At night, in desperation, one of the monks read an exorcism. The emperor screamed and tore the skin on his chest with his fingernails. It was the last day he was kept without handcuffs. A report came from the palace laundress. The sheet was soaked with moisture. The shape of his body was imprinted on it, as if a fish had been left lying there in the warmth. The corner of the sheet was moving. I didn't touch it. Rumors spread throughout the city. Some said that the emperor had died, and his body was being kept secret to legitimize the heir's power. Others claimed that he was possessed. Crowds gathered at the palace walls. One day, a cry rang out, "Where is the monarch's blood?" He was seized and thrown into a dungeon. But the rumor spread. The captain of the guard ordered a healthy servant to be placed in the square, wearing the royal robe. This only aroused more suspicion. Hidden unrest began in the palace. The doctors were replaced once again. A physician arrived from Seville, wearing a plague mask. He examined the body and ordered that the groin be burned to stop decomposition. Fire was applied with an iron. The emperor did not cry out. He did not move. His heartbeat was barely audible. Dark spots appeared on his forehead. The next day, his hair began to fall out, first on his chest, then on his pubic area and head. His pillow was black. Gas began to escape from the wound in his groin. It could be heard even through the fabric. One of the monks lost consciousness and died 2 days later from suffocation. In the evening, the captain of the guard demanded that the chambers be locked. No one entered until morning. Only 2 monks stood at the door, reading psalms. In the morning, one of them went deaf. The second committed suicide in the well. The notes they left behind have been preserved. One says, "At night he spoke in voices. I heard a girl, then a woman, then a voice like my father's. I know he was executed for rebellion. I hanged him myself. I prayed to forget. Now it's all come back." On the 32nd day, his breathing stopped for 7 minutes. The doctors declared him clinically dead. Prayers began. When the monk approached, the emperor breathed in sharply and hollowly. Wet, dark mucus flew out of his mouth. Its smell made 3 people nauseous. One of the soldiers vomited right onto the parquet floor. Then they began to prepare for his final death. They brought a coffin, but the body was still breathing. They wiped him down and sealed his wounds. None of them closed. The servants worked in gloves, with damp cloths over their faces. In the hall where the body had been carried, the bishops and 3 heirs had already gathered. A quarrel broke out between them. One of them, the emperor's younger brother, declared, "If he does not die by morning, we ourselves will declare him dead." On the 33rd day, the servants no longer entered the chambers voluntarily. Those who were sent to bring water or change the linen returned vomiting, covered in dark mucus. One guard, who had locked himself outside, declared under torture, "I heard him singing. I didn't know the words. It wasn't speech. It was rot." Rumors of singing spread among the townspeople. Beggars with black blindfolds began to appear at the palace gates. They prayed for forgiveness for the dead man who still breathes. The ruler's skin shriveled as if from water and cracked. Fluid oozed from under his fingernails. His pupils sank deep into his eyes. His eyelids no longer closed. Every night, the monks placed wet herbal compresses on them, but to no avail. His eyes became glassy. It seemed as if he was watching. One monk, a young man from the southern provinces, muttered in the corridor, "He's not looking outside, he's looking inside." He was sent to a monastery without the right to correspond. The body no longer made any sounds, except for a dull slurping when it changed position. The servants refused to wash the wounds. Then the task was given to the executioner. He came wearing a mask, with a knife and boiling vinegar. When he touched the lower abdomen with the iron, the skin exploded. A cloud of putrid vapor burst from the wound. Everyone in the room recoiled. The medic, who was closest, lost consciousness and died an hour later from pulmonary edema. The official cause of death was listed as internal smoke inhalation. In the courtyard, They began to chop down fir trees to prepare a tombstone, but the church demanded embalming. The body refused to obey. Maggots oozed from the entrails and were impossible to collect. They crawled over the skin, hiding in the eye sockets and ear shells. Touching the stomach caused blistering. The smell spread to the upper floor of the palace. The guards demanded to be relieved of their posts. Some covered their noses with ammonia. Others lowered their heads into a vat of fir resin. One wrote in his diary, "I slept and saw him lying there, but there was nothing around him but earth. He calls, but there is no mouth. He calls through me." Rats began to appear in the corridors. They went straight to the emperor's chambers. One monk tried to trample them, but fell and broke his neck. The doctors recorded in the chronicles that the boundaries between death and flesh began to disappear. The archbishop refused to enter the chambers, sending a disciple in his place. The disciple entered, came out a minute later in silence, and never spoke another word for the rest of his life. On the same day, a letter arrived from the capital. The people demanded to see the body. It was said that a double had been placed on the throne, and that the true emperor was already dead. The guard prepared a duplicate body, made of wax, with ashes in its stomach, but they did not have time to display it. On the 36th day, an event occurred that went down in the annals as decay before the eyes of all. They decided to lift the emperor to change his clothes. When two men took him by the arms, the body broke apart. The rib cage collapsed inward with a crunch. A mass flowed out of the rupture, green, viscous, with flecks of flesh. One of the men dropped it. The body fell to the floor. Worms sprang out of the sheet. There were many of them. They writhed on the tiles and crawled toward the walls. The servants screamed. One began to recite the Lord's Prayer aloud, but coughed on the third word. When he was lifted up, blood flowed from his mouth. The lamp oil caught fire. A curtain caught fire. The fire went out. Everyone fled. Only the old monk remained, unable to move. He was later found with his body twisted, as if he had tried to crawl under the door. At that time, in the neighboring hall, the heirs signed a temporary act of transfer of power. None of them dared to put their seal on it. Then they called the archivist. He put a mark in place of the royal signet ring. 3 days later, he was found hanged. The paper was burned. The emperor's body was not moved. It remained on the floor, wrapped in cloth. Fluid seeped through the cracks. The floor stones darkened. The fire in the hearth went out by itself. The windows could not be opened. The resin had baked in the cracks. The air inside became still, like in a crypt. In a letter to the high priest from the southern diocese, the ambassador wrote, "We do not know if he is alive. His heart may still be beating, but his soul left the room before we entered. No one wants to bury him. The earth will not accept his blood. What should we do? Remain silent." On the 40th day, the body showed no signs of life. It did not breathe or decay. It had transformed into something else. The flesh became sticky, like boiled meat, and the smell permeated the stone. The doctors could no longer remain in the room for more than a few minutes. One of them went blind after a visit. He muttered, "He looked at me without eyes." The archbishop insisted that the body be buried, but no one wanted to touch the remains. Then 4 men sentenced to death were summoned. They were promised forgiveness if they carried the body away. 2 refused. The rest were brought in by force. One, seeing the emperor, screamed so loudly that his throat burst. The second tried to escape, but stumbled and broke his neck. When the guards entered, only darkness and a swarm of insects remained in the hall. The emperor was not washed. He was wrapped in 3 layers of cloth, soaked in vinegar and salt. Boards were placed under his feet. There was a smell of sulfur. The priest did not read the funeral service, but only whispered, "If he can still hear, let him not answer." The prayers did not help. When the body was carried out into the street, people fell to their knees. Some wept, but most remained silent. Snow was falling. One chronicler wrote, "White snow fell on the black cloth, and it seemed as if the dead man had returned to condemn us." In the funeral hall, the coffin lid was nailed down with iron, but even then, dark juice seeped out from under the boards. The guards at the mausoleum complained of nightmares. One of them stabbed himself in the ear with a dagger. Another burned his own clothes. The people said that the emperor was not dead, but had gone underground to watch over the living. A week after the funeral, riots broke out. One of the bishops refused to recognize the act of transfer of power. He claimed that the emperor's soul had not rested and that the throne was empty. He was arrested and soon executed. This caused a wave of panic in the southern provinces. Masses were stopped there. People were afraid of repeating the mistake of the capital. In the north, a pamphlet entitled "The Witness of Death, Who Was Not There," was distributed. It claimed that the ruler had been poisoned and that his body had not been replaced in time. A report from the secret chancellery stated, "Some aristocrats are collecting signatures for the return of the old dynasty. They say that if the throne was rotten, those who occupied it must also rot." In the western lands, a rumor spread that the emperor had risen from the dead and was demanding blood. Peasants were called upon to burn all statues bearing his image. Churches where his portraits hung were set on fire. One artist who painted his likeness was beaten to death. In the capital, the government was divided. Some demanded the immediate recognition of the new ruler. Others wanted to remain silent and pretend that nothing had changed. A secret council met on Friday night. By dawn, 3 members of the council had died of fever. One died while trying to leave the hall. He was found wedged in the doorway with his neck broken. Finally, the late ruler's nephew took the throne. He arrived dressed in black. Without saying a word, no one applauded him. When he sat down on the throne, something crunched beneath him. Everyone fell silent. He said, "We will not speak of him. We will not remember him. He did not exist." But this did not stop the fear. The archivists burned the records of the last few months. The doctors disappeared. One of the old servants, who lived to be 80, said before his death, "I saw worms crawling out from under his fingernails. It was not the end of the body. It was the end of the crown." In a monastery hidden in the mountains, a parchment was found with a note. "If the spirit and the flesh did not reconcile during life, death will not end the dispute." The servants who cared for him in his last days died, every one of them. Those who approached his coffin were tormented by dreams, and to this day the people say, "If you smell vinegar and iron at night, don't open the door. It's him checking to see who still remembers."